Hi, everybody. Welcome to No Country. This is episode 0. This is a new podcast that is being put together by me, J. David Osborne, and him, Kris Saknussemm. Hey, Kris, how's it going?
Good, David. Good. Very glad to be here.
Excellent. Cool. So this is our proof of concept episode. This is going to be a chat style show where Kris and I talk about many different themes. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But first, for people who are either, coming back and starting the show from the very beginning, or maybe people who kind of don't know who we are to begin with, I'd like to just give a brief introduction. And actually, let's start with Kris. Kris, can you give us a brief introduction of who in the hell you are?
Okay, I'm a novelist and multimedia artist. I take pictures for the National Geographic, amongst, many other places. And I'm a failed anthropologist and world traveler. I've lived most of my life outside of America. I'm from the Bay Area originally, but I've lived most of my life overseas. I've been back in the USA since 2012. I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is the entertainment capital of the world, even with COVID-19. A great desert landscape. And yeah, I consider myself, I guess, primarily a writer, but I do try to work in the visual arts as much as I can, as professionally as I can. And I'm very proud that I have a major contract with Routledge Press for a creative writing textbook. And I've got one of my best books, I think, under development in Hollywood if COVID-19 calms down.
And which book is that?
Private Midnight, which I think is your favorite.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite. I'll just briefly interrupt you and let everybody know that you have to go read Private Midnight. All writers start off as children writing their own stories, and it's sort of an innate ability that we have, but there's also always that one book that you read that makes you think this is the thing that I want to do with life, and Kris's Private Midnight was that for me. So please continue. I just had to inject my 2 cents.
Well, thank you for that, because that was a book that almost killed me, and I do think there is an element, and we'll get to talking about this over time, that great art, if it really is going to happen at all, and even if it's not great, if it's good art, I think it pushes you to a place that is dark and mysterious and strange and wonderful, and we need to support all artists who are trying to go there. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that I really always have loved about you is that you're a very generous, souled artist. As I've grown up, and I think we should tell people that there's a big age difference between us, I have never known writers who are really that generous as you are.
Thanks.
And I think that's really important, because this is how we'll survive as a community. And I think one of the things we're trying to do with this podcast, not just for writers, but for any people who are creative at all, to make them feel welcome and to realize that, you're not alone,
Right.
These are strange, weird, bizarre, very difficult times, but you're not alone.
Yes, exactly. So I'm J. David Osborne. I wrote a book called By the Time We Leave Here, We'll Be Friends. It was set in a Russian gulag. Basically, these dudes have to escape, and in order to do so, they have to bring someone with them who they eat when they run out of food. That was about 10 years ago. Kris blurbed that one. That might have been how we met, actually. I might have asked you to blurb.
I think it was.
Yeah.
I think it was how we met, and I was immensely impressed by. I still am. I think that's a book that I would recommend to many people still, because I think it is a good example of a creative voice being larger than the lived experience. And we're going to talk about things like cultural appropriation and staying in your lane and all this nonsense that is happening today. And great work happens when people don't stay in their lane. And, I think that was a really good example. I felt like I was in that gulag. I felt like I really understood what was going on. And it was hair-raising. It was frankly hair-raising. And I really admired that a young writer who really hadn't ever seen that sort of environment could take us there so completely.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. Yeah. So those are our books. You should go out and buy them. Put a plug here right at the top of the show. And I want to talk, Kris was touching on it a little bit earlier, but so the name of this podcast is No Country. And basically, so for me, what No Country essentially means is I've always considered myself to be, as an artist, somebody who's in these communities, someone who's more left-leaning, somebody who leans left socially, economically, etc. And then recently, I don't know if you heard about this, Kris, but there was this thing called COVID-19. Have you heard of this virus?
Oh, I think a little bit of that has drifted my way.
Yes. So
I have heard. Yeah, you have, like, people need to wear masks and things, right?
Yeah, exactly. You got to mask up to save the world. But so basically, when that hit, I was very suspicious of it because my perception of the world, and especially the people who run the world, is that it's largely run by people who are driven by money and power, not by any sort of goodwill towards their fellow men. So
you think?
Yeah. So when that hit, I was very skeptical about the whole narrative, the media narrative that was surrounding COVID-19. And foolishly, I put my thoughts on places like Twitter and Facebook, and I very quickly realized that people had already made that a political football. And so they sort of started coming after me. People who I considered to be my friends sort of very quickly, immediately disowned me. And I guess I got very minorly canceled, might be the term for it. And so when that happened, that got my mind going, and I thought to myself, I might not be on the left at all. Maybe I'm not. So the No Country for me very specifically has to do with the kind of fact that I'm a writer, I'm an artist, I'm a guy who likes to read philosophy and things like that, but that I also my ideas don't necessarily fit into the boxes that have been set forward for me, the boxes of acceptability for thinking. And I'm also a dude. I'm a guy, I love to work out. I love to be outside. I like, cars and shit like that. You know what I mean? I'm not somebody who is, who necessarily fits the current mold. So I felt very alone, but then I thought to myself, I have all these great friends who I chat with on the phone all the time. You're one of them. All these people who have these sort of great stories, and for the most part, they are all similarly outsiders in their own way. So I'll pass it off to you then, and see what of that resonates to you, and what does this No Country mean to you?
Well, it means a lot to me because the biggest experience of my life was stepping free of American culture, or stepping free of any culture. I think that's a really rare moment that people can do. And it never comes because of conscious effort. You can't travel with money to make that happen. You have to be working, living, experiencing other cultures, and to really step outside your own, the baggage that you carry, the cargo that you carry, let's put it in a positive way, is a very, very special thing. On the other hand, you never feel like you're at home ever again. And I haven't. I've been back in America since 2012, and I feel very alien and foreign here. Like you, I wonder, am I left? Am I right? I'm nuanced, I have complicated positions on things, and we're not living in a time now where complicated positions politically, economically, and socially are valued at all. Whereas, artistically, those were the highlights of the past. Mm-hmm. So it's very, very strange. I think we're living at a very, very odd moment in time.
I wanted to start this podcast off, which, as I mentioned at the top of the show, is going to be this freewheeling chat conversation that goes over weeks and weeks, and depending on how many people dig it and how many people tune in, it will be something that we'll do indefinitely, right? So, but I wanted to start it off with this story that you told me once. We wanted to call the episode "The Butterfly in Your Mouth" for a very specific reason. So I was wondering if you could give us the story of that title. What is the butterfly in your mouth?
Okay, well, in my mid-20s, I went to Melanesia, which is the Western Pacific Black Islands of New Guinea, New Caledonia, Vanuatu, and I was trying to be an anthropologist. I was really wanting to experience some very remote village areas, and I got very interested in terms of initiation rites, which I think is something that is desperately lacking in Western culture, and the concept of tribal magic. And I managed to meet an older man who, what a beautiful soul. I can see him in my mind's eye right now. I mean, he was probably 75, then still enormously fit, in a way that Western people are not, really. Because we're not talking tennis club or some sort of elliptic device or something, just a natural fitness. And he was the major sorcerer in the area, and his prerequisite class for me was for me to climb 150 feet straight up, a 1-to-1 gradient limestone cliff, in 105 degrees Fahrenheit, 100% humidity. But the kicker was that I had to have a live saffron yellow butterfly in my mouth, and to keep it alive the whole time, and to release it at the top of the cliff, safe and capable of flight. And I did that. It was a very weird experience. You can ask yourself, well, what's the point of that? Well, you don't really ask an old man of magic, what's the point? You just be grateful that you've ever met them at all. But what it really taught me was a connection between my own personal psyche, my personal physical body, this cliff face, which was hand over hand, and this beautiful butterfly. That part of the world is famous for its butterflies. The great butterfly collectors of the world go there. And I managed to keep this thing alive. And it taught me, I'm not sure what it taught me. It was too almost precious to really try to articulate. But it was the beginning of a relationship. And when the old man did die many years later, I came back to the island and gave a speech at his service, which I thought was very moving for me to be allowed to do. It was really an example, I think, of where magic is real and where it's about kind of serving, I felt that I was grateful to be his student,
Right.
I wasn't humbled. I felt vindicated,
Yeah. I like that. And it brings up a few things. Whenever you talk about initiation rites, it makes me think of Pythagorean mystery cult initiations and how new students to the cult would have to take a vow of silence for a couple of years before they were allowed to engage in any kind of dialogue with anybody. And that does a couple of things. Number one, if you're a brand new, initiate, there's that kind of, have you ever met somebody who just became a Christian and all they want to do is tell you about Jesus, right? So It puts the lid on that, right? You can't go around proselytizing to people. Secondly, you don't probably have anything interesting to say. But third of all, it makes it so that you have to really experience the world around you physically without adding your own 2 cents to it. So, I moved back to Oklahoma recently, And something that I was thinking about when I moved back was that in all my life that I lived there, and in all the time that I spent in Portland and El Paso, I never really got out and just sort of walked around. I never became a part of the environment that I was in. And I always had these damn headphones in my ears, and I was looking at my phone and, looking at what was going on Facebook and Twitter. So I thought to myself, after, having looked into psychogeography, people like Alan Moore and Will Self, I thought to myself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start taking 2 to 3 hour walks every day with nothing on me at all. I'm just going to walk as far as I want to walk in this town that I live in, and then I'm going to go home. So at first I actually had a little notebook with me that I was using to take notes about things that I saw, but then I even left that at home because it wasn't about putting any of that out into the physical world. It was more about making it so that the map and the territory became one thing, right? And the map, the map being something that is inside my own head, and that I'm able, like, things inside my head the furniture starts to get moved around, right, by your outer space. And it makes me kind of think of how before that I would get into my car, go to school, get back from school, go to work. That's been pretty much the story of my at least adult life. And it makes me think of those little hamster cages with all the tubes in them, or I visited Toronto a few years ago, and there are some apartment complexes there. It gets so cold in the winter that people actually go underground. So you'll go down from your apartment, and below it, there are restaurants and stores, and they all connect with these little tubes. So you can go places without ever actually being in the environment. And fair enough, it's fucking cold in Toronto. I get that. But for somebody who lives in a place like Oklahoma, for that matter, Las Vegas, there's no sense in just staying in your car at all, really. I mean, you have to get out. You have to look around. That's what the butterfly in the mouth, I don't know if means is the correct word, but that's what resonates with me when you tell me about that, because you're becoming a part of the universe. You're scaling a cliff face, so you're interacting with your outer environment. And you're also, at the same time, you're keeping something alive inside of you without killing it, right? And that to me maps psychogeographically, like to really become a part of the landscape.
Well, this is the thing that I think we've lost as Westerners. I have an enormous admiration for the Solomon Islanders, who are part of the whole Melanesian archipelago system. They're the most alert people I've ever met. And during World War II, they played an enormous role helping the Allies. And it was never seen appropriate to count any one of them missing in action or MIA. They always had their own category of NYA, not yet arrived. And their alertness and their sensitivity to their environment is something that is so profound, and I'm very excited that I'm ushering in one really fine writer who's going to be published by the University of Queensland Press in Australia. But I think it's a level of physicality in writing and thinking that we so desperately need in this country, where we're socially involved, but we're all so used to our cell phones and Twitter, and we're lost. We're really lost.
Yeah, we're lost, and it's because I think that people don't have anything bigger that they sort of give themselves over to. There's this kind of cult of there's like the culture of narcissism. Who was it? Lash, who wrote that book? Christopher Lash. Yeah. We really are now in the middle of the culture of narcissism. And when you look online and you see how many people have depression and anxiety and things of that nature, it's like, well, you eat like shit. You don't go outside. You stare at a blue light deep into the night, completely fucking over your circadian rhythm. You sleep with that thing turned on, emitting who knows what untold radiations into your body while you're asleep. And then you wake up and the first thing you do is turn on Twitter and find out what's wrong with the world today, So it really doesn't surprise me that people have this kind of thing. And what people need, the answer, I think, and this is just one part of a much bigger thing, but they need to understand that there are forces that are much bigger. You and I have had a conversation about tornadoes recently that I thought was really good about that. You had a particular story about a giant ice cream cone. I thought that was pretty good.
Well, yeah, the thing was, like, I grew up in the Bay Area, which like Oakland, Berkeley, and liberal world, par excellence. And for me, a lot of America didn't seem real. And yet I got out on the road. I was a hitchhiker, and I rode trains, I wouldn't advise anyone to do that anymore. It's very dangerous now. But I got out, early. And when I was 18, I went to Hydro, Oklahoma, which to me seemed like beyond, over the rainbow, over the rainbow. It was, I couldn't believe it. And I didn't know, but I found out quickly that the local high school team was called the Wildcats. And there was this gal who was 25 and looked sort of pretty, who was still wearing her Wildcats, sweatshirt. And I sort of was chatting her up. I thought, well, it's I got to meet people out on the road, right? And we were out in front of this sort of kind of like a dismal frosty freeze type of thing, where there was this concrete ice cream cone about 5 foot high. But thick, a really big concrete ice cream cone. And lo and behold, a tornado came up. And I thought, fuck me dead. This is like, I realize I'm in Tornado Alley, but I didn't really expect I was going to find a tornado. And she grabbed my arm, very, very pretty woman, and escorted me into the frosty freeze to take cover. And we watched while this concrete ice cream cone got swept away over the horizon. And I just thought, welcome to Oklahoma, the heartland of, I just thought this is better than I could deal with, It was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I did actually spend the night with her, I need to sort of say.
Score.
So it was kind of good all around.
Yeah, that story has a good ending. I didn't know that part, but that's important. Yeah, tornadoes are just this amazing thing that I've dealt with pretty much my whole life, and I've always thought it's kind of amazing that the sky can just turn green and open up and take your house if it wants to. I had a particularly life-changing event with a tornado. I had written a book called Black Gum about this time in my life, but it was, I was separated from my wife, who's still my wife today, and my behavior was just awful. I was just all over the place. I was drugged up all the time. So I had been at a rave or some such event in Tulsa, and I was driving back on, I believe it was I-40, and basically you can see that the weather starts to change, and if you've lived here long enough, you know when that weather is tornado weather. So the wind starts whipping. I turn it to some AM weather radio station, and I learn, sure enough, that there's a tornado pretty much right on top of me. So I'm pushing my 98 gold Honda Civic as hard as it can go. It was this dump of a car. My brother had ran it under a bus, and so it didn't reverse, and it wasn't able to brake in fourth gear. So what I would have to do is I'd crank it up, and I'd have to let off the gas pedal and let it slow down to about 55 so I could get it into third gear. So I was just in this car pushing it as hard as it could go, which was maybe 85, 90 miles an hour. And I see a cop car behind me coming up, no lights on. And I think to myself, like, there's no way he's going to pull me over. And sure enough, he did not. He actually whipped past me because he was thinking, fuck this too. He was trying to get out of harm's way. So I end up getting to one of the toll booths, which is one of the great ironies of Oklahoma roads, that they're complete shit, but you have to stop every 20 miles to pay a toll. So I get to the toll, and semi-trucks have parked in pretty much every entrance. They've decided that's where they're going to ride out the storm. So I park my car. I run out to the little kiosk. The wind is whipping all over the place, and it's locked. So the toll takers have already taken shelter. and lock the door. So I go back to my car, and I take out my phone. It's a very primitive phone at the time. And I called Rios, my wife, and she picked up, and I said, look, I just want to tell you that I'm sorry for everything that I've done. And of course, in her mind, she's probably thinking, David's drunk or high, and he's, which I wasn't. I was actually in that sort of state where you're coming down off a speed binge, where your bones feel completely empty. But I don't blame her for thinking that. So she kind of hung up, and I saw the tornado come down in the distance about a half a mile out, and I thought to myself, this is pretty much what I deserve. And I was going to call my mother, but then I decided to sort of close my eyes and just sit there. And time passed, and I opened them, and the tornado was gone. The sun was out. And I thought to myself, so that is a sign. That is a message. That is not something that I'm going to ignore. That isn't something that, that wasn't just a phenomena of nature. Like tornadoes in my mind are sort of alive. There are, native.
Oh, they are.
Yeah,
they are alive. They're women.
Yeah, there are these native dudes, I think, out in El Reno, who are able to perform a ceremony in where if a tornado's coming their way, they throw a hatchet or a tomahawk into the ground and sort of split the tornado off so it'll go around. And it's got I think 100% success rate. So what they're essentially doing is they're communicating with a living thing, right? And it's my belief that tornado that I experienced was also a living thing. And in the same way that people talk about alien abduction stories or ghost stories or, being visited by angels, that was my Oklahoma angel that came down and didn't say a single word. I didn't hear anything telepathically or otherwise, but the message was clear. And the message was I needed to get my fucking shit together.
That makes sense to me, and I sort of feel sorry for people that doesn't make sense to, because, wonder is real, and wonder is also very scary. But if you cut yourself off from wonder because of you're scared, you miss the wonder, and I think that's absolutely true. I mean, we live embedded in a very, think of this, really. We're on a planet.
Yeah.
Yeah. That escapes most people 99% of the time. That is a bizarre fact that is just simply, it's astronomical, literally,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we just can't get with it,
Yeah, we can't get with it. And so I think practically what people can start doing, what I think the butterfly in the mouth and the walking around. So I like to take walks around these neighborhoods, as I said, and I like to look at people's porches, especially those people who you can tell have sort of lived there for sometimes maybe their whole life. But, they'll have bowling pins and hula hoops and those clay suns that are very prominent decor in the Southwest and I suppose Oklahoma as well. But you see all these people's lives lived, all these books. You're walking through a big library, right? And, it kind of reminds me of the William James quote that we're all sort of like cats in a library, how a cat can see all the books but can't read them, doesn't know what the hell they are. And that's kind of, I think that humans give us a little bit more credit for that. So, for example, today I'm walking around and I go to the gym and I'm walking back from the gym and I go to get a bottle of water from this gas station that's sort of it's this outdoor kiosk, and it's one half of it is shuttered. And I asked the attendant, do you guys sell water? And he says, yeah, but somebody tried to break into it last night, so we can't open it. And I thought, oh, okay, so that's what this part of the neighborhood is like. And I continue walking, and as I'm walking down the road, I see this black dude laid out on the grass, just chilling in the shade. And he's yelling something at me, so I take my headphones out and I say, what's that, man? He said, what time is it? And I told him. And so first of all, I thought that was pretty amazing that this guy was living without any sense of what time it was, which is something that we can kind of get into. I continue walking down the street, and as I get closer and closer to my house, I can hear him yelling at me again. So I take my headphones out, turn around, and I say, what? And he's standing there in the middle of the street, no shirt, and he says, I'm in the street. I'm in the middle of the street. And I thought that was such a bizarro Zen interaction, that we had there. You know, I was interacting with a person who, probably on drugs, let's be fair, but who really had a connection, of kind of visceral connection to place. And so he was sort of doing the same thing that I was doing, whether he knew it or not. He was in the he was in the street. Does that make sense?
Look, it makes total sense to me. I've been thinking a lot about this. I've just been out on a really major road trip around Nevada, which is not my home state, but is my home now. And it's kind of something like what you've done moving back to Oklahoma. And I did catch up with a Paiute friend of mine from the past. I did a course in Native American Studies in college, and I did my residency at the Paiute Reservation in Pyramid Lake, and it's closed now because of that virus that people talk about. But I met him for a beer, and we have very different life paths. He's the head of logistics at a major cement plant, and I'm not. But he had taken me out hunting with his son back around the turn of the century. And I'm not a big hunter. I never have been, except I hunted wild boar in New Guinea. But he took me out with his son, and it really meant something to be with them. The snow was just starting to fall, and I thought to myself, and I thought again just the last couple of days, that sense, that cultural coherence is very, very localized. You know?
That's right.
There is something about things that just, it's not like a credit card that's good anywhere. We got to get away from that attitude. There's something about Oklahoma that is different from other places, and that's why you're there. That's what's cool. There's something about Nevada. There's something about being a Paiute Indian as opposed to, someone else. Sense, cultural coherence is not transferable across all boundaries at any given time. And why should it be? Why should it be?
Right. No, I 100% agree with that. I think that living in Oklahoma now and sort of being among these familiar landscapes, the way that people park their cars on the grass and the way that the grass even grows in different fits and spurts and the trees, and it's a very green summer. We've gotten a lot of rain, so this is the greenest it's ever been. I felt like it was sort of a welcoming me back. Mostly Oklahoma in the summer is brown. It's yellow and brown. But this summer is very, very green. And so I think, again, taking these walks, putting the butterfly in your mouth, sort of understanding the space that you're in, allows you to connect to it in a way that it's like giving yourself an extra brain, right? And so I think...
Good way to put it.
Yeah, I think with anxiety and with depression, I think that those are demons, and I think that those demons take up residence in your brain, and they have nowhere to go. But if you can assemble a team, and that team is the trees, that team is the front porches of your neighbors, right? That team is that guy who's standing in the street. Those things, if you put your psyche out into the world, right, as it's becoming part of you inside, then I think that those demons become subject to the outside world itself, right? And Oklahoma doesn't have any time for that kind of shit. It's a hardworking place. It doesn't have time for anxiety or depression or any of those kind of things. So again, when we talk about the magic that we're going to be talking about, I'm of course coming from it from a very animist perspective, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about what do you think magic is?
I think it is animist driven. I think that I totally believe in the great traditions of animism from around the world. I think that it's a starting point of connecting to individual psyche, individual body, with community, with non-human environment, and it's one continuum, and that the continuum is alive and real unto itself all the time, and really, I mean, I think one of my best nonfiction pieces ends with the line, "Who are you to feel alone?" And I really
Yeah.
believe that. I think that most of mental health problems in the West, whether it be anxiety, depression, paranoia, you know, any kind of substance abuse issues, all of it really hinges on a kind of loneliness. And there are people in the world who just don't feel lonely,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and
Because
I
who are
think
you
we
to be
need to
lonely?
ask them. Right, and we need to get with that program, and to me that is where magic starts, of just being able to connect with the world. I mean, I love the idea that you're concerned about what's on people's porches,
Yeah.
because I think what good writing is about is being attentive and looking around, and I'm tired of people who claim to be writers who really aren't interested in human beings. I mean, and there's a lot more to be interested in than just human beings, right? But if you're not at least a little bit interested in other people, yeah, you're not really a writer to me, you know?
That's great. That's what I was going to ask. That was the next place I wanted to go, was how this all relates back to writing. And I like what you said there, because I do feel like a lot of writers are kind of moving their dolls around the board. They know how story works. They've read Joseph Campbell, and they're able to sort of create these little dolls, or action men, or whatever you want to call them, and sort of make them kiss and make them fight, and take them places. But they haven't become golems yet, right? Like, they don't have any life breathed into them. And so I don't have any answers, but I'm curious as to what you think the connection between magic and writing is.
Well, I think that magic starts with a belief in being part of something bigger than you are, and feeling good about that, and feeling that there's something to explore rather than there's something to express. I get tired about people who are into self-expression. I want people who are out exploring what they don't know.
Yes.
That gets me turned on.
That's
It's
great.
like, you know.
No, that's
It's
amazing.
like,
No, I love the idea of exploring versus expressing. Because like you said, expression, people can find solace in that. There are people who love books because it reminds them of themselves, and they feel a connection to a person, and for a second or two it alleviates the loneliness. There's nothing particularly wrong about that. But in a bigger context, if you look at a filmmaker like David Lynch, who I'm sure I will mention 150 times on this podcast, but that is a person who I've never felt that they were expressing anything. They were always exploring.
And going some weird places that then make you feel like you can actually adventure out into some strange terrains yourself,
That's right. That's right.
I mean, where did this idea come from that we know ourselves? That's just such bullshit. We don't have any idea. We are amazingly unknown terrains to ourselves all the time. And we just need more courage to go out there. Do you know John Lilly, the guy who invented the sensory deprivation tank and was the great dolphin communicator? He's a great hero of mine, and he said something that I think is really profound, because I did a lot of sensory deprivation tank work in my middle to late 30s, like hundreds of hours. I had access to some really cool stuff. He said that his experience was the great fear that humans have is not of death. It's of madness. It's of dissolution of self. Dissolution of self. That's that's the existential threat that people have. And that was exactly that meant, whether I was doing LSD and tanking or just tanking, or being out in wilderness environments. I did a lot of, really hardcore wilderness solo stuff. I wasn't afraid, I really felt that. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of losing my mind, losing my sense of my personal being. And then I kept asking, well, who do I think I'm losing here?
Yes, that is it. No, that's great. That is a great insight, I think, because when you look at things like anxiety is fear about what'll happen to you in the future. And depression is being upset about what has happened to you in the past. And the answer,
right.
the common denominator that needs to be dissolved is the idea of you. Connor Habib has this great phrase that our heads are meeting places for spirits and our thoughts are their voices. And I love that. I love the idea.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, I love the idea of us being connected to spirits and to place in this sort of rhizomatic, almost mycelial network. You know how mushrooms grow huge underneath like the roots of trees, and it's essentially the biggest brains in the entire world are these mycelial networks of mushrooms. But when you become something more akin to that, when you start to realize that when you get down to it, when you get down to your core, there is no you there. Now, to many people, this is very terrifying. But once you get there, you realize that things pass. We live linearly in time. And that all you can really do, there's that word again, you, right? But all you can really do is explore. You can't. It makes no sense to have anxiety about tomorrow, and it makes no sense to be depressed about all the fucked up shit you've done in your past, because there's no you there.
There isn't, in fact. I mean, if you go to look for that, where is it?
Right. Point to me where you are. Point to me where your thoughts are. They still haven't figured that one out. Science has been trying to, but we'll get into my science hate in another episode. But
well, there is one nice sort of segue here that takes us back to the social, practical world. John Cage is an artist and musician that I go backwards and forwards on, and you probably have too. I don't know how important, I just can't make up my mind. But in addition to being a musician, he was a fanatical mushroom hunter. And he was out with a famous botanist. And they were hunting for mushrooms in New England. And he said, it's just so nice to be with someone who isn't as snarky and difficult as musicians can be. And his botanist, mushroom expert friend turned to him and said, "You clearly know nothing about what botanists are really like."
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that you and I want to break down, is that we want to be, welcoming to people without being snarky, and also not apologizing for liking long-neck beers and pretty women.
Thank you for listening to episode 0 of No Country. We hope you enjoyed it. If you know of anybody who might find the things that Kris and I talk about interesting, please do alert them to this podcast. Go ahead and subscribe to it, share it on all of the social media, and tune in next week where we'll have our first proper episode, which will mostly just look exactly like this episode. If you like the music on this episode and going forward, that's done by Andrew Osborne, who goes by the name Ousli, Ousli. It's on Spotify, Bandcamp, everywhere you can get it. It's really good ambient tracks. My brother's a very talented musician, and I want to get as many people as possible to listen to his stuff. So please do that, and thanks also to Andrew for mixing this episode and making it sound really good. All right. Talk to you guys next week.